in particular as it relates to oversight. But this is pretty simple. I mean, you're just fundamentally talking about public figures, government actors, steering massive amounts of taxpayer dollars to political allies. That's it. It is grifting and fraud and corruption. You know, you could sort of pick the phrase, but fundamentally it's treating taxpayer money as though it is their own, and all while Americans are struggling right now to make it the worst job numbers that we've seen since COVID just yesterday announced. So yeah, I think there are a number of different ways to pursue accountability, and I'm certainly going to be supportive of that.
Welcome to the prosecution. We operate entirely on facts. We deal exclusively in evidence. We rely strictly on the law. Today, we examine the Department of Homeland Security. We examine massive financial fraud involving hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars. We examine the deaths of American citizens in the streets of Minnesota. We examine the abrupt firing of a cabinet secretary. And we examine documented corruption at the highest levels of government. Let us begin.
I mean, remember, we had American citizens killed in the streets in Minnesota. This administration still not taking accountability for that. They are not even doing a real independent investigation into those killings. And they have been refusing to take the steps needed to be able to restore trust from the American people, which is why we're currently in a shutdown. So the fact that this administration is trying to bring forward another nominee while we're in the middle of these negotiations, that they have not shown any willingness to get to the point where we can say to the American people, you know, we have found the reforms needed to prevent other American citizens and others from being killed.
We begin with the opening judgment. We identify a direct false claim made by the administration. The Department of Homeland Security issued a formal statement to the press. The statement addressed a controversial $100 million advertising contract. The department claimed decisions regarding this contract were made exclusively by the Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The department explicitly claimed Secretary Kristi Noem did not make those decisions. That is a lie. It is a demonstrable lie. It is a calculated fabrication designed to conceal massive financial corruption from the American public. It is a lie designed to protect a fired cabinet secretary from criminal liability. It is a lie meant to insulate the Trump administration from a severe federal procurement scandal. The department used its official authority to lie to the American people. This lie cannot stand unchallenged. We must precisely define this lie. We quote the exact claim and identify the speaker. The speaker is an official spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security. This spokesperson represents the full authority of the United States government. The statement was given directly to NBC News. The exact claim is that decisions about a specific $100 million contract were made by the Office of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director and not by Kristi Noem. This claim attempts to shift criminal culpability downward to a subordinate agency director. It is a fabricated defense.
And while MS Now has not independently confirmed this reporting, yesterday Trump administration officials told NBC News that Kristi Noem personally handpicked contractors for a different $100 million ad campaign. And wouldn't you know it, she picked the same firm that somehow got that $143 million contract and the other firm that somehow got the rest of that $220 million contract. What are the odds? Now, in a statement to NBC News, a spokesperson for DHS said that the decisions about this $100 million contract were made by the ICE director's office, not Noem. But three administration officials said that the ICE director had nothing to do with it. They say it was all Kristi Noem.
Three separate administration officials completely contradict this official claim. These officials state that the director had absolutely nothing to do with this contract. The director had nothing to do with the vendor selection. The government issued a false statement to hide the fact that Kristi Noem personally handpicked the contractors for a massive federal expenditure. The lie is defined. The contradiction is established. Let us look at the forensic evidence. We examine what the evidence proves and what it does not prove. The forensic evidence comes directly from congressional oversight, public reporting, and administration insiders. Donald Trump fired Secretary Kristi Noem. The stated reason was a combination of unfortunate events, but the forensic evidence points directly to severe financial crimes. We have evidence of a massive advertising campaign totaling $220 million. The initial focus is on a specific contract for $143 million. This is taxpayer money meant to produce advertisements. The evidence proves this massive sum went to a highly specific, unproven company. Representative Joe Neguse pressed Noem on this exact company. The evidence proves this company had never done any work for the government before.
but on how a $143 million contract to make some of those ads ended up going to a company that ended up subcontracting and paying a business that had personal ties to Noem herself.
Do you know, just by way of example, whether this company that received $143 million in taxpayer dollars, has it ever done work for the government before?
I don't know. I can't.
The answer is it has not. And do you know why we know that? Because it was incorporated 8 days before this contract went out.
There you go. That mystery company that Congressman Joe Neguse pressed Noem about this week, it turns out that $143 million contract.
The evidence proves this company was incorporated exactly 8 days before the federal contract went out. You do not hand $143 million to a company that has existed for 8 days. Not legally, not under standard federal procurement rules. The evidence goes further. This newly formed shell company subcontracted the actual work. They paid a business with direct personal ties to Kristi Noem. The evidence proves financial benefit flowed directly to the husband of one of Noem's closest aides. That is what the evidence proves. The money went from taxpayers to an 8-day-old shell company and directly into Noem's inner circle. The evidence also proves the existence of a second contract for $100 million. Public reporting and administration sources show Noem personally handpicked the contractors for this additional money. She picked the exact same firm that secured the $143 million deal. The evidence proves a clear pattern of steering taxpayer dollars to political allies. Representative Joe Neguse states this is treating taxpayer money as personal property. The evidence proves Noem engaged in this behavior while Americans struggle with terrible job numbers. The evidence proves she actively worked to stop the Inspector General from investigating anything at all.
I believe that ultimately when the evidence eventually comes to light that there were laws violated, federal procurement laws, conflict of interest laws, and, of course, potentially civil and criminal penalties that could attach. So it's going to be very critical for us to get to the bottom of it. We're working, of course, with our colleagues in the Senate and doing what we can to ultimately implore the Inspector General in the Department of Homeland Security to investigate these matters as well. As you know, Secretary Noem was working vociferously hard to stop the Inspector General from investigating anything. I suspect that that is going to change here in the coming weeks.
What the evidence does not prove currently is the exact level of presidential involvement in the specific vendor selection. Public commentary alleges the president signed off on it, but the exact Oval Office paper trail remains unclear. However, the financial diversion at the Department of Homeland Security is heavily documented. Let us analyze power and control. We must understand how authority was abused. Kristi Noem held the massive power of a cabinet secretary. She controlled billions of dollars in federal funds. She used that power to direct federal procurement. The $143 million contract demonstrates corrupt control over the bidding process. An 8-day-old company cannot win a federal contract of that size without top-down interference. Noem exerted executive power to bypass standard procurement laws. She controlled the flow of money. She steered the money to her allies. She then used her power to block oversight. The sources confirm she worked hard to stop the Inspector General from investigating. This is the ultimate exercise of corrupt administrative control. You commit the fraud, and then you use your power to disable the burglar alarm. Her control extended to the secondary $100 million contract. She personally handpicked the contractors. When caught, the department used its institutional power to lie to the press. They blamed the Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They used the massive power of the federal government communications apparatus to construct a false narrative. But the power analysis does not stop with Kristi Noem. Senator Andy Kim states the problem is deep to the core of the Trump administration. Stephen Miller and Donald Trump are running the show. They hold ultimate executive power. They use this power to push a highly dangerous agenda on the American people. They use this power to systematically gut critical federal agencies. They gutted the Federal Emergency Management Agency at a time when we worry about disaster response. They gutted the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They fired the experts protecting the nation from cyber attacks. They used their power to leave the country highly vulnerable while engaged in a war with Iran. Donald Trump chose to start a war of choice. He used his power as commander-in-chief to initiate conflict without closing embassies or getting diplomatic staff out of Baghdad. The administration used its control over information to maintain total silence. Americans abroad were given zero information for 72 hours. Then the administration used its power to tell them to depart immediately, causing mass panic. We also look at power and control regarding domestic enforcement. The administration used its power to deploy disguised agents in Minnesota. They created a palpable blanket of fear. Children were terrified to go to school. The administration failed to protect its citizens. American citizens were killed in the streets of Minnesota. Renee Good is dead. Alex Freddie is dead. Liam Conejo Ramos was abducted and used as bait. Mr. Sosa was shot in the back. Senator Kim confirms the administration refuses to take accountability for these killings. They refuse to conduct an independent investigation. They use their power to ignore extreme violence and avoid answering for blood in the streets. What is the strongest defense argument for the administration? The defense will argue the contracts followed standard agency procedures. They will argue the Department of Homeland Security is massive and the Secretary cannot personally oversee every vendor. The defense will rely on the official statement given to NBC News. They will say the Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement made the decisions, absolving Noem. They will argue delegating authority is a standard legal management practice. They will argue any ties between subcontractors and Noem's aides are coincidental. The defense will argue the president holds absolute authority to appoint and remove cabinet secretaries. They will argue firing Noem solves the problem. We dismantle this defense immediately using the law and the strict evidence. The defense of delegation is completely shattered by the facts. 3 administration officials explicitly stated the Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement had nothing to do with the contract. The official department statement is a proven fabrication. You cannot use a documented lie as a valid legal defense. Furthermore, federal procurement law strictly forbids steering contracts to politically connected shell companies. The company receiving $143 million was incorporated exactly 8 days before the contract was issued. This destroys any argument of standard procedure. Standard procedure requires vetting and a track record. 8 days is a massive violation of federal procurement and conflict of interest laws. Representative Joe Neguse states this clearly. The evidence shows Noem personally handpicked the contractors. She knew exactly where the taxpayer money was going. She knew it was going to the husband of her closest aide. The defense that firing her solves the problem is also dismantled. Senator Andy Kim dismantles that entirely. The corruption is deep and ongoing. The administration still refuses to take accountability for American citizens killed in Minnesota. The administration is still actively gutting cyber defenses. The appointment of Markwayne Mullin to replace Noem proves there is no return to standard procedure. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison explicitly states Mullin is going into that position based on pure loyalty, nothing else. Mullin does not have a single bit of experience doing Homeland Security. Sources confirm Mullin is willfully ignorant. Replacing a corrupt official with an unqualified loyalist perpetuates the danger. We must understand the exact laws at play here. This requires basic legal education in plain English. We are talking about federal procurement laws. When the government spends taxpayer money, it must follow strict rules ensuring open, transparent, and fair competition. You cannot legally take $143 million of government money and hand it to your friends. You cannot legally create a shell company, wait exactly 8 days, and funnel millions of dollars through it to your inner circle. That is fraud. That is a federal crime. We are also talking about conflict of interest laws. A government official cannot use public office for private financial gain. They cannot use their office to enrich close associates or the family members of their aides. Steering a massive contract because of personal relationships is a severe violation of these core statutes. Next, we look at the law regarding congressional testimony. When a cabinet secretary testifies before the Senate and House Judiciary Committees, they are under oath. They are legally required to tell the absolute truth. If they lie about where the money went, they commit perjury. Members of Congress state publicly that Kristi Noem lied before these committees. Perjury is a felony. Lying to Congress is a serious crime designed specifically to prevent legislative oversight. Finally, the Inspector General is an independent watchdog required by law to investigate fraud. When a cabinet secretary actively works to stop the Inspector General from investigating, they are obstructing a legal process. Representative Neguse correctly notes that severe civil and criminal penalties could attach to these exact actions. It is time for a strict professional judgment on responsibility and fitness. Kristi Noem is fundamentally unfit for any public office. Her documented actions demonstrate a staggering level of corruption. She treated the Department of Homeland Security as a personal piggy bank. She engaged in blatant grifting and fraud. She diverted hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars to her allies, while everyday Americans struggled with terrible job numbers. She used her massive public position to elevate herself and enrich her friends. She is completely devoid of the ethical standards required for basic government service. But the ultimate responsibility goes far higher. Donald Trump is entirely responsible for this disaster. He appointed her. He allowed this massive corruption to fester under his direct watch. He fired her only when the public exposure became a severe political liability. His judgment is profoundly dangerous. He is currently replacing Noem with Markwayne Mullin. Mullin lacks any relevant experience in Homeland Security. He is completely unfit for the critical role. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison correctly notes that Mullin demonstrated a complete lack of basic judgment when he nearly started a physical fistfight with a union leader during a formal Senate committee hearing. Mullin also lacked basic historical knowledge, believing the Ayatollah Khomeini had been in power since 1979. Appointing an unqualified, blindly loyal individual to run the Department of Homeland Security while the nation is at war is a severe dereliction of duty. The administration's absolute failure to protect Americans abroad during an evacuation from Iraq proves they cannot manage basic security operations. Their failure to investigate the horrific killings in Minnesota proves they do not care about domestic justice. This administration is totally unfit to govern. The evidence we present is backed by severe expert authority. We rely on the statements of Representative Joe Neguse. He is a sitting member of the United States Congress. He directly questioned the administration on federal procurement laws and exposed the 8-day-old shell company on the record. We rely on the statements of Senator Andy Kim. Senator Kim is a member of the Senate Homeland Security Committee and a former State Department officer. He has deep professional experience in diplomacy and national security. We rely on the statements of Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. He is the chief law enforcement officer for the entire state of Minnesota. He is currently managing civil and potential criminal cases regarding the extreme violence in his state. We rely on Representative Nancy Mace. She is a Republican member of Congress demanding a formal subpoena for Kristi Noem. We rely on multiple unnamed Trump administration officials acting as whistleblowers to NBC News regarding the fake contracting statements. The authority is bipartisan. The authority comes directly from top-level law enforcement and top-level legislative oversight. We must demand strict institutional accountability. The system is currently failing the American people. The Department of Justice must step in immediately. Representative Neguse correctly notes that under the current Department of Justice, it is very unlikely that we will see any potential consequences for perjury. This is a massive institutional failure. The Department of Justice exists to enforce the law impartially. When a cabinet secretary steals taxpayer money and blatantly lies to Congress, the Department of Justice must indict. The courts must be heavily involved. Federal prosecutors must impanel grand juries right now. Every single Department of Homeland Security employee involved in these advertising contracts must be subpoenaed. The institutional failure extends directly to the White House. The White House has completely failed to conduct a real, independent investigation into the horrific killings in Minnesota. They have failed to hold anyone accountable for deploying disguised agents who terrorize neighborhoods. The oversight committees in Congress must forcefully assert their institutional power. They must issue subpoenas immediately. They must track every single dollar of the $220 million ad campaign. The Inspector General must immediately release all findings regarding Noem's obstruction. The institutions of the United States government were designed to check executive overreach and prosecute financial corruption. The law must be applied equally to those in power. The institutions must wake up and do their jobs. We close with the procedural consequences. We deal only in what happens next. No hope, no hype, only the procedure. Kristi Noem is no longer the Secretary of Homeland Security. She will face congressional subpoenas from the oversight committees. These subpoenas will demand documents and sworn testimony regarding the $143 million contract and the $100 million contract. The Inspector General will proceed with the investigations that were previously blocked by Noem. In Minnesota, Attorney General Keith Ellison will advance civil cases. He will advance potential criminal cases regarding the severe violence in his state. These specific cases include the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Freddie. They include the abduction of Liam Conejo Ramos. They include the shooting of Mr. Sosa. In Washington, the Senate Homeland Security Committee will hold confirmation hearings for Markwayne Mullin. During these formal hearings, senators will legally demand answers regarding the administration's policy of deploying roving patrols. They will demand answers regarding the active gutting of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They will demand answers regarding the reduction of cybersecurity staff protecting the nation against cyber attacks. They will demand answers regarding the highly chaotic evacuation of Americans from Iraq. If the Department of Justice follows the law, federal grand juries will be convened to examine procurement fraud, conflict of interest violations, and perjury related to the cabinet. The legal mechanisms are now in motion. The evidence is preserved. The timelines are set. The jurisdiction is established. These are the cold, hard procedural realities governing the actions of the United States government moving forward. The prosecution rests.